I called Concept 2 and I was asking for some parts and I was trying to explain it. And the woman said, no, hang on, I'm going to stop you there. No one who works at Concept 2 has ever seen one of these machines. She was like, they stopped making parts for them years ago.
What's up? Welcome to Last Show Counts. Today we are doing a little episode from the road. Where are we, Tom?
We're in Edinburgh.
Why are we in Edinburgh?
We've had a little trip up north, and we've normally, the last few years we've done one trip a year, so we've just started getting a second trip in to cover a few clubs up this way. So we started in Newcastle, and then today in Hexham, and driven up to Edinburgh. Tomorrow we've got North Berwick, some ski ergs in Edinburgh Uni, and then on the way back, some ergs in Teesside. So yeah, a bit of a full week trip up north.
Well, and once we're also finished with the trip up north, we're also going to Cambridge on Friday to do some...
Yeah, we got Jesus College and then a couple of extra ergs on Friday. So yeah, it's a full week.
Just because it's Easter, that doesn't mean we're off.
So no. Yeah, we're quite often out and about. So yeah, we thought this was a good opportunity to test the equipment on the run and make sure we can still do some cool videos. And then also if we get a chance to sit down with some interesting people who aren't local to us, then we know that sort of equipment's ready to go.
Absolutely. So let's get into today's episode. We've got a fun little show planned out. We've got quite a few questions since releasing the previous two episodes. So we just wanted to do a little Q&A and kind of share some insights. So
yeah, we got a question like one day after I think we posted the boat race video, and that kind of prompted us on our last video to ask if anyone had any and just see if that could push the podcast in a different direction. So yeah, it's pretty good. I'm really surprised. We've got some good questions, so got some stuff to talk about. I think it'll be interesting to go over.
Awesome. Let's get into it.
Yeah, cool. So that first comment was posted on our boat race breakdown. So this was from Vicky, and the question was, I was wondering what the thoughts were on the prospects for the women's coach. With 5 losses in a row, do you think this will discourage good athletes from choosing Oxford? So,
what do you think?
Potentially. Obviously, Josh had said that you do get a situation when a club starts winning more, it might encourage more athletes to go to that club. But then at the same time, I think next year is an Olympic year, so you're unlikely to have a lot of foreign or high-level international athletes coming over. And I would think that someone who's coming to this country to do the boat race is interested in winning, and then will be more likely to choose the university that they thought was winning the most.
Yeah.
Whereas next year, I think it would be still, the same as they built it this year, more of a student race. So I'm not necessarily the case.
So if someone's looking at the recent results, they might be more likely to choose Cambridge, but is it going to discourage Oxford students in the future? Well, what could Oxford do differently? Obviously, a change of a coach isn't going to solve the problem straight away, because it takes time to develop a program and put systems in place and to see real results and the yield from the work that's being done. And obviously, Oxford's women coach doesn't have a bad track record, does he?
Yeah, I actually just gone and looked at some of the statistics, because I knew that he'd done quite well in previous races. But yeah, he's been coaching Oxford since '97. This is Andy Nelder. He did the lightweights from 01 to 06 and won all 5 of those races, and then spent 11 years as assistant coach to Sean on the men's side, and got 9 wins of 11, 7 which were successive. So he's certainly got some pedigree in boat race racing. You could say potentially what he's learned under Sean and what works with the men maybe doesn't work with the women. But I think as well, you've got to take into account that both colleges have stepped it up. Both universities stepped it up certainly since 2015 when it went onto the full race course in London. And I think there's maybe been a little bit of an arms race, and Oxford looked like they got there earlier, so they won 2015 and 2016 by quite large margins, and Cambridge have sort of come through since then. But again, just looked at some statistics. Saying Cambridge have won five in a row. But you look at some stuff. I mean, from the men's races in the 80s, Oxford won 9 of 10 that decade. In the 90s, Cambridge won 7 of 3. So it's not uncommon to have a bit of a run.
Yeah, a large winning streak.
Yeah, I mean, again with the women, who said look for the 90s, I think Cambridge won 8 in a row. Those were on short courses. Some other things come into play, but I don't think it's. And I think also the winning margins have been smaller over the last few years. There have been smaller margins, and when you take that over a 20-minute race, we discussed before, the percentage change is quite small.
I mean, especially if you understand the history of the event, it's not uncommon, like you said, for streaks to happen. So who's to say that Oxford aren't going to turn it around in the next 8 years and clean sweep,
Yeah, and what we said about the other video, sometimes when you lose quite heavily, that can be the inspiration to make some changes or try and do something slightly differently that maybe you didn't have the confidence to do if, it sometimes takes a bad result to bring change. And I think a lot of the things that we spoke about with Josh, about Sean, are still true. So recruitment is really, really important. And if they found a way to increase that or do a better job with that, then that could have a huge effect on it. So, yeah, I guess it's probably in 2 parts. Potentially, yes, you could see certainly more international or high profile athletes wanting to choose the university that's been winning previously. But eventually, like I said, the win streak will will go, and
the odds will even out. Yeah.
So
I would certainly hope it wouldn't discourage athletes from choosing Oxford. I mean, both universities have got such great history, so they're both worth rowing for and giving it a go. And also, if you're a competitive athlete, maybe you're going to be the one that's going to ignite that change. Maybe you're going to be the one that's going to push Oxford to change that losing streak into a winning streak. Who knows?
Yeah, I think also Josh mentioned that there's more undergrads doing it, and potentially if you're looking at an undergrad degree, one university could make more sense than the other. And if you're going to Oxbridge, it's probably likely that your course is going to take the front seat as opposed to rowing. And I think the other thing,
especially as an undergrad, yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing is, if you look at it, there's more and more athletes coming through the system and being developed at Oxford. So an athlete who's been rowing in their colleges and maybe spent a couple of years in the development team and is coming up as part of Oxford, they've been in that squad, they're part of that Oxford team. I certainly don't think they're going to jump ship to Cambridge just because Cambridge have won the last 5 years. So with high-profile international athletes, yes, but certainly not with all athletes. And like you said, I don't think it's a win or loss streak that can be overcome, and it's certainly not the biggest that has ever been in the past. So I definitely wouldn't say it's the be all and end all.
Cool. What's the next question?
So we got one from Ollie. He said, "Have you ever moved to a new club or squad and found they do some things drastically different, training philosophy or rowing style, etc. And how have you dealt with that?"
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Should I take this?
Reading this, I was like, okay, this one's for Pete.
Okay. I've moved my rowing career from Poland to England back in 2014. So I rowed over in Poland for a couple of years, and I did some stuff with the national team, like some training camps and some trials and some, spring assessments, that kind of thing. So I kind of know the style that they're trying to embed into young rowers. So then when I came to England, not only did I have to essentially relearn everything, I had to change my entire understanding of how rowing worked. Now, because it was in a club like Leander, I could just blindly follow the words of the coaches like gospel and really just essentially shut up and listen and just ask as many questions as I can to kind of get a really good understanding of what they're trying to teach me. And I would say that this has paid off. But if, for example, you're in a different position where you move into a club, but you've got some rowing experience and potentially you might not quite get on with the new style of rowing they're trying to teach you, I would still say you should try to buy into your new coach's program and then try it out, see if it's got any legs, see if it's got any merit, and then maybe make some career adjustments based off of that. What do you think, Tom?
Yeah, I haven't. I've moved clubs. You know, when I joined Leander, there was certainly a different system, but I knew that was sort of set up to take me where I wanted to go. So it was easy to trust that process. But I have had changes of coaches year on year, and I would agree with you when you said sort of trust the process. So I think the worst thing you can do is be half in and half out. So if you say you're not quite sure if what your coach is telling you to do is right or wrong, I would trust that process for an amount of time. So for a season or certainly up until a number of races to actually play it through and see if it has worked, because different coaches work in different ways and there are different ways of getting the best out of your crew. Some coaches like to start from the front and work towards the back. Some coaches like to start at the back and then work forward. So I definitely think there's a period of time that you want to trust in that process and see if it pays off. Another thing that's going to depend definitely like how long you've been rowing, how senior you are, what level you're at, as to how much it might be. You know, you might even have any effect on if you did say something. But in general, even if you maybe necessarily haven't bought in, or this seems like a large change, the best thing you can do is just keep asking questions and not necessarily trying to question or in a negative way. I would just be like, if you don't quite understand the process or where it's going, or you don't see the end goal, just keep asking questions about that and like making sure that you understand what the purpose is. I think most good coaches are happy to try and explain why they're doing something in a certain way and to sort of show you the long road and the reason why they're going about it in that way.
I think it's safe to assume that whoever your coach is, they're going to be semi-reasonable to a degree. So they will have their reasonings and, justifications for using the philosophy that they're trying to incorporate into the club. So it's just really just worth opening a dialogue with them and speaking to them, like you said, ask questions and try and find out exactly what they want you to do and what their philosophy is for moving the boat fast. Because I think from my personal experience, understanding what the coach is trying to do and why, it makes it so much easier just to buy into the system. And obviously if you're moving your club from somewhere else in the world to, for example, a place like Leander, well, I obviously had no doubt in my mind that the coaches know absolutely what they're doing, and I just need to trust the process, listen to everything they say, and just make changes as soon as possible to make the vote. So there was not really any time for arguing, or else I guess I would have been on the sidelines. So it really depends on what you want to do, but I hope this answers your question. Yeah,
it's a little bit difficult without context, but yeah, I can talk for a few different options, and all of these things are there's probably no finite answer to any of the questions we're answering. But
yeah, speak to your coach, trust the process, and train hard.
Yeah. Number 3.
What have you got?
This one's from Emily, and it says, how should you or how do you row differently in different boat types?
So I used to be a sculler. So predominantly I spend my time rowing in singles, doubles, and quads. So when it comes to sculling, the biggest difference that I found between boat categories was just how high the boat was sitting off the water and how sensitive you had to be to certain things. So obviously you can slam the drive so much more inside of a crew boat like a quad, versus you have to be so much more precise and, fine-tuned in a single. Your movement has to be so much more, I guess, synchronized with how you think you're rowing and like what the blade's doing, and you have to make sure you're minimizing the wasted motion. But another thing about the different boat categories is you can a surge in a single during a race is going to certainly bring more of an effect than a surge in a quad, because one, it's just only one person making a change, and two, because the boat's lighter, you can actually shift the weight on the water more significantly and like have it have a proper effect. What do you think, Tom?
Yeah, so the main thing being probably the length of race for me. So the bigger the boat, the quicker the race generally is going to be. So in terms of that, certainly affect tactics a lot. For the most part, eights, the distances change less in terms of like a length is much longer. So clawing a length back on an 8 isn't much different to clawing a length back on a single or a double. So I think you would find in smaller races that the lead can change more often. so tactics might come in a bit more. And then I think the other bit being the amount of the boat that you're responsible for. So in an 8, you're only responsible for 1/8 of it, which I think is why you can get away with being a bit more powerful, maybe a bit less technical. Like traditionally, that those people might be sat in the middle of an 8. At the each end, you might have someone a bit more technical, and you would be able to get that boat going faster because you maybe had some very powerful athletes who in a pair might not be able to move the pair quite as well. That sat in the middle of an 8 can be way more effective. So in terms,
You just got that platform that you can just, have the boat set, and you can just kind of almost row like on an ergo. Just lay the power down and look in front of you and just keep laying it.
the higher you get to the top, the less likely it is that anyone's going to be doing anything badly. And in terms of like saying in a bigger boat, you can just hit it harder. But yeah, if you're racing at an international level, you still have to have that real composure and that real accuracy with your blade work. But the other thing being like, again, for a shorter race in an 8, you might blast a lot harder out the start, and you might get that psychological advantage. Once you've got that length, knowing that it takes much longer for a boat to come back. You could have that advantage, by being able to just kind of watch that crew behind you, and you can kind of measure how much you work off them, and if it looks like they're coming back, you can make a move, and that can be effective before they've come through you. Whereas in a single, someone takes 5-10 strokes for burst, they're half a length through you before you kind of like, oh, I need to make a move here.
Yeah, you said something really important there, and that's due to how long is a length. It really depends on which boat category you're racing in. So for example, in an 8, a length is between 3 to 5 seconds depending on your skill and ability level. But in a single, that is a length isn't even a second. So in order to gain a few lengths, for example, say you're going 3 to 5 seconds faster than someone in a third 500, you're obviously going to see a massive difference when it comes to just how far along you've managed to move your boat. So yeah, it's it all becomes a bit finer the higher the boat class goes.
Yeah, I mean, I also would say that I think quite a common question I get is when I say I row is someone says, "Oh, do you row in an 8 or do you row in a pair?" And you said, "No, we row in all different boats. We race in all different boats. We test in different boats. It can depend on the year, on the event, on the trial." And I think that's something again I've heard from coaching novices. Maybe quite often novices will say like, "Oh, what should I do differently in a different boat?" I think on the whole, not a lot. I don't necessarily think, "Oh, I'm in a pair now. I will make these. I will now row like I'm in a pair." And like, "Oh, now I'm in an 8, so I'll row like I'm in an 8." I don't think there's like that big a difference in terms of it's more like being responsive to the 8. So I think when you're in an 8 and you're 1/8 of it, and that platform is there, you can maybe work harder or feel like you can work harder. Whereas in your pair, you're 50% of the boat. You're the only blade on that side. You sort of have to row a bit more with your partner. You have to be a little bit more like gentle with it, but that's just really in a response to the boat. It's not like, right now I'm going to row this way. I think for the most part, you really want to make sure that you're just responding to what's going on at the time, listening to the Cox if you have one. I definitely wouldn't say there's like a completely different rowing style, although some people might disagree with me.
I mean, I would certainly discourage rowing differently. And if you've just been rowing in a pair and your coach tells you to go in an 8, certainly there isn't a specific rowing style just for an 8. I think it's still legs, body, and arms.
Yeah. The basics are always going to be there. I think that's important. But yeah, there's some different stuff like that we've gone over. Again, hopefully that answers the question. If not, leave a comment and we'll try and add a bit more to it afterwards.
Sounds good.
Right, next one.
What have you got?
So I've got 2 questions from Charlie. So Charlie said, "I'm a Cox, so my question is, what makes a Cox stand out in a selection process or as part of a squad?" So we'll start with that half first.
That's a good question. So as a Cox, my understanding is you have 3 roles at the very basic level. You need to make sure you're steering the boat straight and in the best possible line. Then you need to command the crew and kind of let them know what's happening around them. You need to give them information. You need to make sure they trust in you, that they're not looking outside of the boat. And then lastly, you need to motivate them. So firstly, you need to take care of steering. Secondly, you need to make sure your crew is kept well informed by you. And then lastly, you can motivate them. Once those three are in order, then you're going to be further ahead than 90% of coxers.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that order. I think that's pretty common for people to say, you know, if you're not steering, if you're not doing your job steering, if you're not on a good line and it's not safe, then just about anything else you say is not really going to be that helpful. So there's sort of an order in what you do first, but assuming that you've been coxing for a certain amount of time, and those are probably things you have been working off. I was just sort of thinking, like, from my experience, like, what have I liked from coxes that we've had or that I've had? I think a big one for me is a cox that finds that link between the crew and the coach. So I think you technically are an athlete, you are in the boat, but you're not a rower. And you have that ability to be that coach in the boat, be the voice in the eyes of the coach at times as well. So you want to be that link between the two. And I think another thing that's made coxes stand out is when they have an understanding themselves of rowing. So I think coxes who have tried rowing, I would encourage all coxes to row, not necessarily for a long time, but a couple sessions in a boat or certainly on the ergo, to get the idea of, like, the understanding of what you're asking your crew to do. And certainly I think when coxes have rowed, so I know I've had a cox before who's done a couple of 2K tests, and that for them made a difference in their head to understand that, oh, when that last 500 comes and I ask for more, like, I know, you know, I need to be aware of what I'm asking for, because I felt that, you know, the pain in the last 500 and the lactic.
And knowing it and feeling it's a different thing. I definitely agree that you should double with rowing as a cox, even if it's just jumping on an ergo or doing rowing. Where I'm from in Poland, I was told that coxes always used to train with the athletes. So sure, we'd have a 12K erg session to do, but our cox would do it with us. They would do their own split, but they would still complete all of the training because they were part of the crew. But I think what you said is also really, really important. As a cox, you're in a pretty unique position because you're kind of in between, like you said, between a coach and an athlete. So you have authority over the crew, but you also need to be translating everything that coach is saying into the boat, because obviously the coach doesn't have the cox box and the mic on. So you're going to have to be the one that talks to the crew, takes care of them, controls them, make sure that, you know, the plan for the session is carried out. So it's a role full of responsibility, and I really, really hate it when coxes get looked down upon as just people who steer, because as a role it's just so much more than that. But I wanted to ask you, from a coach's perspective, what do you look for in a cox when choosing one for the race?
That's a good question. For me, it's a good mixture between being aggressive and commanding and being able to motivate your crew in that way, but then also having a sense of control and calmness, and being able really to take everything else away from the rowers and allow them to just row. So you don't want them looking out the boat. You don't want them worrying about where the next crew is. So those kind of, being able to do those kind of things and just take the stress off the rowers. You don't want them feeling like every time you turn, they've got to be looking out the boat, you know, before a race, they're turning to come onto the start line or something. You don't want them looking around, like thinking, oh, I need to help here, or we might hit something. And obviously, if you haven't been coxing that long, you're going to make mistakes. But I think
Part of the process.
Yeah, for sure. But I think, like you said, as a coach, I think you want someone who is able to take initiative, but who also does listen. So that is a balance. But I think initiative and conviction. And I think I've seen some good coxes in the past who've been put off by maybe rowers. Maybe they've started to spin the boat in a certain way, and then one of the rowers has gone, why are you spinning it this way? You know, we don't do it this way, we do it another way. And then they've been like, or maybe we should change. And by that point, you're in the middle of the river and someone else is trying to come past. And so I think certainly, like, when you make a decision, you need to sort of stick with it and not let other people kind of knock you off where you're going. Now, that being said, like, if you're a very, very novice cox and you start making a decision and it's going to go wrong, you know, occasionally it might take an athlete who's with a bit more experience to just say, come on, let's change the plan here or something like that. But in general, once you've got past that initial novice stage and you are competent in what you're doing, like we said, that you're able to steer and make good calls. And then lastly, as you get higher right up to the level, it's really being able to respond to the boat. So you can learn a lot of calls, and you can have an effect by rolling through those calls. Let's work on the front end together. Let's line up the back end together. Let's add 5% more on the legs. Like running through those, that's always going to be good. There's always going to be ways to pull a crew together. But what would set a cox apart with me, it would be a cox whose calls are responsive to the boat and how that's going. So if it's very down on one side, a call that would, help level that out, or something that responds to how the boat's moving and feeling, I think would be good for me.
Definitely, reading the boat is a big thing, and also being able to have that connection with your crew. Like, for example, during the race, if you can kind of engage different athletes in your crew in different stages of the race. So, for example, you can have an athlete in the middle of the boat, and you can make a call directly to them, keep it personal, and keep a good relationship with your crewmates. Because then, the more they respect you, the more they will trust you, and the more they will just blindly kind of follow what you say to them. But also, if you're an athlete, have definitely like patience for the cox. It is a pretty difficult position, and there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of stress going on with trying to manage the boat and managing what's inside and outside, because as a cox, you also have to be like very aware of your surroundings, and it can be pretty tricky at times. So I would definitely encourage having a bit of patience.
Yeah, I think trust is really, really important. And and there can be situations in a race, there've been situations in a race in Henley where we've been down or a crew's been coming back, and we normally would start our push set 300, our final sprint to finish, and it's 500 to go, and the coxer says, right, we need to go now. And if you have that trust in your cox, and you're going to go, and if you trust that they know what you can put in, then that's a big part. But a big part of gaining trust that doesn't happen overnight. It's just something that slowly grows over time. So I would say try and do the small things right. So make sure always 5 minutes early for a session. Make sure always they're happy to help the coach or the crew take some blades out, or again, like, be part of a squad. Just because it's a land training session and you're not having to cox, you can go down there. You can talk to the coach. You can look in the mirror at some of the technique.
You can still motivate your teammates, and for example, when they're doing a 2K test, you can give them that extra encouragement. And then, like I said, when you want to keep it personal during a race, you know what makes each different athlete in your crew tick. So use that to your advantage, because that's a cheat code.
Yeah, the longer in your crew, the more time you're going to have had with each other. And I think that's important. And it's important to know what motivates people, what makes them tick. And the more you know about your crew members, the more you're going to be able to, like you said, say that thing that's really going to get the most out of them during the race.
I know definitely what would make me lose trust in a cox, and that is the inability to count. Because if you're going to call a power 10, please make sure it's not 12 strokes. If you're going to say it's 200 meters to the finish line, it better not be 250. If it's 15 strokes till the finish, I don't want to take that extra 3 strokes after.
But I think just something like doing a 1K or a 2K flat out on the ergo, it gives you the appreciation of why 10 strokes has to be 10 strokes. I think sometimes it's just because if you haven't been in that situation, you can't quite put yourself in the mind frame of the athlete. It's like, I'm absolutely dying here. Like, I've only got 10 left. Oh, thank God it's the last 10. Like, that's all I've got. So, yeah, I think just showing understanding or trying to put yourself in their shoes can be really useful.
Awesome. What's the second part of the question?
So, the second part of that question is also, what cox recordings or races with strong steering would you recommend, or that have left an impression?
Well, I've got one that I really like, and you've actually showed this to me when we were doing some coxing training for our athletes last year, and that's a recording of, I think it's Scott Cockle during a under-23 World Championship race in Račice in Czech Republic in
2021. So I just looked at the title of the video is Under-23 World Championship Cox Recording GB Men's 8 2021.
We're going to add a link in the description just so you can find it easily. So the thing I really like about this race is that the cox does a very, very good job at isolating their crew from the rest of the competition, because I've personally never raced at that level, but I imagine you really need to be just focused on what you're doing and disallow all the external factors from being able to affect you in any way whatsoever. So Scott does a really, really great job at making sure that their crew know exactly what's going on. They know what splits they're doing. They know how far they are in the race. You know, he engages every single one of his athletes on a personal level. And yeah, GB ends up winning that race in a really, really dramatic, fantastic manner. And I think Scott had a really, really great part to play in that.
Yeah, it's a fantastic race, and it's it's a race where you can see what the Cox is doing has made a difference. Because you can see how they work through and through and through, and he keeps them together, and how they're able to stay on their pace. And I think that's really good. Yeah, I agree with you. I like the way he speaks to the crew. And another one I really like for that is the Ladies Plate final in 2017. It's a Cox recording by Harry Brightmore, who obviously now is a world champion and is the GB men's 8 Cox. I really like that one because it's that great mix of control, calming influence on the crew, and then also the aggression and getting that crew up for it, and making them raise the occasion and understand that this is it, and it's all or nothing, and quite often I think in Henley finals anything's possible, and it's going to be two fantastic crews, and sometimes it's just that crew that's able to stick their hand in the fire a little bit longer, or take command or control of the race. Obviously it's going to be an incredibly high pressure situation. I think Harry does a really great job of just keeping that control, and like I said, it's a mix. I think quite often it can sound from the outside like a Cox is just screaming and shouting and roaring, but
there's so much more than that.
Yeah, I think that one with Harry and with Scott, I think that's a really good way of showing how you can be aggressive but still calm and controlled, and they just really take everything else away from the rower. They let them know where they are, they let them know how it's going. We're on pace, this is fine. If someone's gone out too hard, if they're in front of us, they've gone out too hard. Just like that confidence, just bigging you up and allowing you to have that confidence to just go and do your job. Because inevitably down the race, that voice is going to come and it's going to say you're not good enough and you're not going to win this and it isn't going to happen. And like having that other voice in the boat of that Cox, in a Cox boat, obviously, just reassuring you this is fine, we're right here where we need to be. I think that's great.
That's why it's really important to keep that balance between aggression and being calm and collected, because if you're just going to be aggressive, eventually your athletes won't pay attention. They'll start tuning the aggression out, because they still need to be focused on what they're doing, and they're going to start having that internal dialogue, like you said. So the best way to prevent that happening is to make sure you have at least 2 modes.
I think the other thing is it can be quite daunting as a Cox when you're mic'd up to your crew to have any pauses in what you're saying. Sometimes you feel like you should be talking a lot. And I think, again, both of those videos are really good at showing that it's okay to have a couple strokes. If you've made a change, let that change happen. You can have a pause. You can move on to the next thing in a couple of strokes. It doesn't have to be constant dialogue. And I think on that point that you said, if it is constant, it starts to just get put into the background a little bit. It doesn't make as much, it doesn't hit as hard. So yeah, I definitely recommend those two. And then in terms of steering, so they're on straight courses on a 2K lake, so that's probably not a steering one. One I think it was really good for a steering decision that changed the race is the 2016 women's boat race.
That was a good one. I watched that live from the bank.
Yeah. Morgan Byrne-Williams, who is now a Rowgear athlete, which is not why I chose this, but she just made a really decisive call in the middle of that race. It was really choppy out in the middle, which is obviously considered the faster water. She moves over to the bank off her station, and that's a decisive move that won the race for them that year, or certainly opened the gap up to allow them to finish ahead.
The commentators thought she was crazy. They were saying, I'm not sure that move's going to pay off. I'm not sure that was the right decision. Cambridge will have the advantage. 2 strokes later, Cambridge get hit with a massive wave and they start sinking.
I think it is. I think it can be very deceptive watching from a wide end camera angle, or watching from a helicopter, the water and how rough it could be. I think for a Cox, there's a much better view of how bad that water looks. So I can see why they thought maybe initially it was quite mad, but obviously since then that's sort of gone down as a race where a Cox made a decisive move. Again, like if you're a very new Cox, if you haven't been Coxing that long, being able to make a change to the plan as big as that would probably be not necessarily recommended or very difficult to do. So it's going to depend on your level. I'd also just recommend there's a string of boat race finals or boat races where steering is very important on that course, and there's some where steering's really made the difference. So if you're having a look through boat race races, then that can be really useful. But yeah, no, I think that one just as a great example of a really decisive move from the Cox that's led to a win.
It made all the difference because Cambridge went from almost not being able to continue, umpire asking them if they wanted to resign, to Oxford going from being head to head with them to winning by 24 lengths. So being a Cox can make such a big difference. So definitely don't be afraid of making those executive decisions if you're in a position to do so.
Yeah, I really hate sometimes the Cox. I get the feeling that people say like, well, the Cox isn't rowing, so they can't win a race, but if they mess up, they can lose it. But I think it's just not true, really. And the Cox is as important as any member of the crew, and is as capable of winning it or losing it as any member of the crew. Just because you're rowing, you can also mess it up, and not to put more pressure on any one athlete. But I think every member of the crew is important, and Cox is, those races that we've just said, there's some really good examples of how a Cox can be a part of the win and can help win that race.
But if you want to hear a little bit more about how much Coxes can make a difference, next Wednesday we're recording an episode with Morgan Byam-Williams. So we're going to have yours truly on the pod, and hopefully she can bring some really saucy insights into the world of Coxing.
Yeah, Charlie will definitely ask her that question as well. I think it'd be interesting to see her top videos that she's watched, and maybe made an impression on her, but then obviously what she would see that would help us Cox stand out. And I think she's also done a lot of coaching as well as before she was in the team, and during the team she's coached crews. No, she's coached crews. Sorry. In the GB team, so some probably more useful insight than what we've got for sure. But again, hopefully that answers your question to a certain extent.
Awesome. Do we have any more?
Yeah, one more. So last one is Stefan, and he said, "Do you have a pre-race ritual? And if yes, what?"
I don't really have a pre-race ritual. I have more sort of pre-race habits. So definitely, I don't want to be eating any less than 2 hours before start time. And I have to be changed into racing gear at least 3 hours before my start time. So I want to feel comfortable. I want to get used to the feel of the all-in-one. I want to feel that special, fabric on the day of the racing. I want to feel that sort of responsibility. But more so than this, I'm also going to just stick by my crewmates pretty much for the entire regatta day. So we're going to be doing everything together as a crew. And that was also taught to me by most of my coaches. They said, like, as a crew on race day, especially at Henley, at Nat Champs, you have to do everything together. You go for food together, you go to the toilet together, you rest together. If one of you lies down, all of you lie down. You have to make sure you act as a crew. Obviously, you don't have to take it this extremely, but just be aware that if you have a really good bond as a team, it can make the difference on the day. But as for a pre-race ritual, maybe I'll eat some serene malt loaves, but that's about it. Maybe I'll listen to some songs that I like, but nothing more special than that.
Pete likes a malt loaf. I thought this question was interesting. So I don't know whether with just specifically the wording of it. So in terms of a ritual, what you might say, like something that you always did, or a piece of clothing that you always wear. In general, I've sort of gone by the mantra that, like, the less you rely on, the less likely you're going to have a problem if it's not there. So if you have your lucky socks and your lucky cap, and you always drink a can of Red Bull, and you always have 3 Jaffa cakes, and you make this a ritual, I think that gives more and more chance of you not being able to have one of those things, and then really struggling mentally with feeling like you're not prepared for the race. Obviously, if you already have a lucky cap, then that's probably not going to change All I would do is make sure that I've just double, triple checked that I've got it with me. But that's no different from, say, your all-in-one. When you go to regatta, like, you're gonna make sure you've got it on you, you keep it with you, you check 3 times before you go. So in terms of a piece of clothing like that, but then to go more into, like, do you have sort of a pre-race process, or do something that a system that you stick to? Like, definitely. And I think that's a really important thing of racing, is to make sure that you stick to your processes, to start running through an order of things that you've got used to. And for us, certainly from the first race of the season, we would start trying to get that process. So 2 hours before, we'd go for a little warm-up jog and a stretch, or, like you said, we might make sure that we've eaten. We're not going to eat again with 3 hours or 2 hours before, whatever works for you. There's some personal personal preference. But I think, and then certainly as the race gets closer to the end of the season, you get to bigger races, the nerves get higher. Running through the process is something that's really going to help control that. So what I always would get most nervous would be talking the pre-race chat, per se, before a World Championships. And it's because I'm never normally in a chat talking about how we might win a world medal. And that would really, really stress me out and get me really, really nervous. But then we would go down to the boat, and then we would start that process that we've done 100 times before, and then we would check our boat over, and then we'd go and get changed. And that going through that process allows your head to just go a bit into automatic mode, and that really helps settle my nerves. So in terms of having a process, I think that's important, but I think that's quite personal. There are certain things definitely you don't really want to be eating within two hours of a race, and you want to make sure you're not eating heavy meals or a lot of meat and things like that. So there's certain things to stick to, but as a general rule, it's going to work between you and your crew and how you work that out. And that's something that I think that you can develop throughout a season. Every time you go to a race, you want to be trying that out. And I think you want to train how you race. You want to make sure you race every time how you want to race. So I think even if it's a little warm-up regatta, or it doesn't matter, every opportunity is a chance to run through that process and just streamline it and be like, the jog was a bit early. We went for a jog 3 hours before. I was cold before we got in the boat. Let's bring that forward. So you definitely want to play around with that and use every opportunity to work it out. But yeah, I mean, that's probably for me, process, yes. Rituals, no.
Definitely. And there's nothing wrong with having one if it works for you. But if you are going to have one, avoid the pitfall of making it too big, because say your pre-race ritual is to have 3 Jaffa cakes and 2 cinnamon swirls. Well, on a day that Tesco's shut, you don't want to make sure that your 2K success is reliant on that. So if you're going to have one, probably keep it to a minimum, but definitely it's worth having one just to get you into that mental zone. There is something really, really interesting that happens when you just go through the same motion. You can ease the anxiety, ease the nerves, and just get into your mode faster. But keep it down to a minimum, because anything that's too big is just a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, no, just the other point I would make is don't make huge changes either. So don't listen to what we've said and be like, right, next time I race, I'm going to do this, and this, and this differently. Probably what you've started doing is a good start. I wouldn't make any huge changes, and whatever you normally do on a normal night, don't change that because it's the night of a race. It's like, well, we're racing tomorrow, so I'll eat 4 kilos of pasta. Don't make those kind of huge changes. A lot of what you're going to do is a lot of winning a race is done in the hard winter months. I think you can kind of maybe do things too differently on race night, or I've got to do this, I've got to do that. The race is coming, and you can just kind of wind yourself up into a bit of a mess.
Are you trying to say that if I've skipped all the eggs in the winter, but I eat 4 kilos of pasta the night before, that's not gonna outweigh the?
It's carb loaded. I mean, I literally said that because we did that. I mean, my first year at Leander, we did one of our first head races. We did head of the Trent, and our Cox came over our house the night before, and we just cooked a ridiculous amount of food, and I think half of us felt a bit
carb loading.
Yeah, but half of us felt a bit mad the next day. So yeah, I think saying that, make small changes, change things one at a time, so you can actually see the effect of that, and stick to your process, but avoid rituals.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So what are we doing next week?
Next week, we're going to chat with Morgan. Hopefully we get that out by the end of the week. We are going to be fixing some more ergos, as always, some more row machines. And then, fingers crossed, we're also going to have a little sit-down chat with our third athlete at Rowgear, Susie Deer.
The legend.
Yeah, one and only. And in terms of this, we haven't, like I said, we were on the road, we're doing a lot of work this week, so we haven't had loads of time to prep. We've really just kind of written down the questions and gone for it. So hopefully it's helpful. I mean, if there's anything else that comes up from it, like definitely put another question in. And like I said, we're not the be all and end all, and it's advice based on what we've done and where we've been. But for sure, I'm sure there's bits and pieces that we've missed as well. And part of the reason for getting other people on is to get their experience of these same situations. So for sure, when we get Morgan on, we'll ask her those Coxing questions and a few other similar ones. And I think hopefully over time, when we get more and more athletes on, we get more and more experience and just more knowledge to share.
Perfect. And yeah, just because we're servicing and touring, that doesn't mean we're not going to put episodes out. So Rowgear's always on tour in some way or another. So
yeah, if you follow the stories and try and make sure we keep an eye on what we're doing and post some stories, and it's quite fun now. One day we're in Newcastle, next day we're in Scotland, next day we're in Cambridge. So we definitely get around a bit.
Well, that's what happens when you service over 100 clubs in the UK.
Yeah, it's a busy, but it's good.
Busy's good, yeah.
Yeah, it's great to be able to get around. It's great to see new people and be able to fix equipment. We did a dyno strength training the day, which is
ancient.
I mean, I called Concept 2. I was fixing some for a different club. I called Concept 2 and I was asking for some parts and I was trying to explain it. And the woman said, "No, hang on. I'm going to stop you there. No one who works at Concept 2 has ever seen one of these machines." She was like, "They stopped making parts for them years ago. Like, we don't even know what you're talking about." So yeah, that's a dinosaur. But we got that one up and running, so that was good. It was good fun.
Awesome, cool. In the meantime, if you've got any more questions for us, please feel free to drop them in the DMs or down in the comments if you're watching on YouTube. But also, if you have any ideas for episodes that you'd like us to cover, maybe there are some certain topics or like something that you're struggling with, let us know and we'll try our best to kind of cater to that as well. But
okay. Are we going to say like, share, subscribe?
Oh yeah, like, share, subscribe. Definitely send it to all of your Facebook groups and, share it with your mom. Put it on a big telly and just keep it running over the night so that we can get more views. But I'm sure that's going to help.
Hopefully. Yeah, if you like it. Yeah, it's up to you.
Awesome. Easy there.
Cue the music.